Stat of the day, at least for me, that I came across, it shouldn't be any big surprise. Ohio State's averaging 57 points per game against Maryland since the Terps joined the Big Ten. Averaging. I don't know that you can find that in any series across the country. 57 on Saturday. I think we'll take that. That's what the weather forecast basically is. And I think Buckeye fans would take that on the scoreboard once again. Could be a different Maryland team that shows up in Columbus. We shall see on Saturday and maybe get a look at it here in the next hour. Buckeyes live right here at the Voice of College Football. Steve Hellwagon's right next to me, 247 Sports, bucknuts.com. Kevin Noon, join him on Buckeye Huddle. It's also the Big Me podcast, and also College Football Playbook is an option right here on YouTube. Check that out. All right, guys, here we go. Into the Big Ten, back to it. There's been about 4 times this week that I've thought about this being the Big Ten opener, and then I was like, oh yeah, there was that Indiana game. But this almost feels like the Big Ten opener after playing 3 non-conference games. Steve, we'll start with you in regards to your initial take on this Maryland Terps team.
I watched a good bit of the game against Indiana. I was driving around and was listening to the first part of it on Sirius. And, I listened to their pregame show, and they actually have a pretty good football team this year, it seems like. This is a big step up in class. I think, obviously, it goes without saying. They've played Towson. They had a struggle for a half against Charlotte in a primetime game on NBC, of all places. And then they came through that one with flying colors. They blew out Virginia, which I don't think has won a game yet. I think they're 0-5, which is crazy that Virginia hasn't won a game in its early October.
Haven't won a home game in 2 years.
Oh my gosh.
In the ACC.
Yeah, they got to do something about that. So then obviously they went to Michigan State program in complete turmoil, beat them 31-9 at Michigan State, kind of humbled them up there. And then last week at home, they were up 27-3 at halftime against Indiana. Never gave Indiana much of a chance. I don't know what the final score of that game ended up. I apologize. I don't have that in front of me.
44-17.
44-17. So representative second half. They got some other guys playing time and still won the second half. So to me, that was a big step forward for them as well. Everybody knows about Taulia Tagovailoa, their outstanding quarterback. He is their career leader. He's started roughly 33 games, I think, now for Maryland over the past 2.5 seasons, and is their career passing leader, career touchdown leader, and some other stuff as well. Just had a bang up, a great career there already. And, this was a team that was 8-5 last year. And, they're trying to punch above their weight a little bit and trying to show it's a miscarriage of justice that they're not in the top 25 this week, but the voters kept LSU at 3-2 in there. Now LSU has played, and lost, to some good teams, Florida State and Ole Miss. They've lost to better teams than anybody Maryland's played. So, rate that however you want. But Maryland's right behind them at number 26. So Ohio State gets no credit for playing a current top 25 team this week. Even in the coaches poll, they're at 26 in that as well. But they are a quality opponent. Probably the best Maryland team that Mike Locksley has put on a field yet in his 6-7 years, whatever it is, as the Maryland head coach. So I am enthused and excited about this game. Maryland's given them a couple competitive games over the years. Ohio State's dominated the rivalry for the most part, 8-0. They did not play in the COVID season. That's why there's, instead of 9 games in the series, there's only been 8. They never played prior to Maryland joining the Big Ten in 2014. So it's an intriguing thing. And 8-5 last year, they won the Duke's Mayo Bowl over NC State. Last year, they went to Michigan. They gave Michigan a really good game and lost by 7 points, I think, at Michigan. Got stomped by Penn State 30-0, and then lost at home to Ohio State 43-30 in a game that was roughly, I mean, Ohio State trailed at halftime in that game, and it was roughly a one-score game either way for about, 45 or 50 of the 60 minutes. I think Ohio State grabbed control in the second half, and then Maryland cut it back to a one-score game and had the ball at the end, but then a defensive touchdown for the Buckeyes made it 43-30 in the final seconds. Not sure how that registered on the bad beat meter there, if that impacted the spread or not, but Buckeyes almost a 3-touchdown favorite to take care of business on Saturday at the Shoe against Maryland.
Yeah, I've looked at this game a couple of different ways, broke down something I just posted over at Buckeye Huddle, broke down Tagovailoa and how he compares against other quarterbacks on Ohio State's schedule, ones they faced, ones they've yet to face. We've come a long way since 2017 when Maryland was 3 of 13 passing for 16 yards. Then again, it wasn't much better running the ball, 42 carries for 50 yards. So
was that Bortenschlager? Was he on that team? I'll have a shot of the Bortenschlager.
Ty Pigrome. I mean, I don't know. I mean, they couldn't keep quarterbacks healthy at that point. And interesting factoid, and what does this have to do with this week? Nothing, but Ohio State's margin of victory over Maryland in Columbus is 44.3 points per game. Ohio State's margin of victory over Maryland in College Park is just 25.3. So we're talking almost 20-point differences, but it all comes into matchups and where everything is at that point. Maryland hasn't played anybody, but over 2 games against Ohio State, we have seen Talia pass for, I believe it's 71.2% completion percentage. Granted, 21 was, we were getting down into the depths of Ohio State's secondary not being so hot. 22, we saw some, they were making progress, but they still had those big plays baked in, and big plays did happen. So I'll be interested to see what 23 is. I mean, I do see some fool's gold when I do look at Maryland in certain aspects that I think Ohio State can exploit, but I'm not ready to say that I'm willing to lay the points at this point either, because there's still a lot of unknowns.
The interesting thing looking at Maryland's quarterback situation, there is an alternate timeline where Tristan Wallace stays committed to Ohio State and Dwayne Haskins stays committed to Maryland. And those guys are both part of the 2016 recruiting class. And, there wouldn't have been a Max Bortenschlager. Perry Hillis would have done his, couple of years as a starter, and then it would have gone to Dwayne Haskins, and then it probably would have gone to Talia Tagovailoa, and it would be a very different Maryland time frame in there. And just looking at some of those quarterback names, we didn't even mention Kasim Hill there at Maryland. And I don't even remember, I think in 2019, Josh Jackson, I have no recollection of him. But they'd always have like 2 guys throw for like 800 yards over the course of a season because they couldn't stay healthy. It wasn't that long ago. They had a linebacker playing quarterback because they were down to like their 5th or 6th guy. So it does give you some wonder, like what happens when Talia is gone, because you can almost put the entire program on his back in terms of this resurgence. Because right now, I think they have a claim as the 4th best team in the Big Ten. And if they were in the Big Ten West, they'd be playing for a Big Ten title. But here they're playing for 4th place in the Big Ten East. And it's unfortunate, but it's one more year of this, and then they can be free of the shackles of the Big Ten East, and then be happy that, oh gosh, now you've got Washington and Oregon and USC and UCLA to deal with as well.
If I remember the Josh Jackson year and the fool's gold that year was Josh Jackson played for Virginia Tech in the ACC championship game. He was a pretty decent quarterback, big guy. And then he comes to Maryland. People are excited, and they blew the doors off of Syracuse. And Syracuse had a decent season the year before. So that they scored like 63 points and then had like a Wagner kind of win. And then after that, they went south.
They,
and that
they lost to
capsized.
Temple. They lost at Temple the week after the big win over Syracuse.
Okay. Yeah. Then it must have been like a zillion points in week 1 against whomever. A Towson, probably.
Howard.
Probably Towson. Yeah. All right. Yeah. It's they posted 2 100-yard receiver efforts. Jashawn Jones was their number 1 receiver in terms of yardage and receptions last year, and Ty Felton turned in a $134 with 3 touchdowns and a 46-yarder against IU last week. So yeah, is this the Maryland team that it's been from a skill position standpoint and defensive backs, but a much sturdier team up front on both sides of the ball? That's the major question to be asked and answered. For
Yeah,
sure.
and they're not much of a running team either. Now, somebody I'm sure will be quick to say, well, they're averaging more yards per game on the ground than Ohio State. Well, okay, but we all know what Ohio State has been doing on the ground, and they had a 61-yarder against Notre Dame, and then on the other 25, 26 carries, they had not much. So it's weird how things kind of work with Maryland. And one of the big things that I had in my piece as I was breaking down Tagovailoa is I think everybody views him as like this huge dynamic dual threat quarterback, and he's not. He does not run a lot. Now, he does have an offense to where he can read the keys and he can pull it down and he can run, and he already has 3 rushing touchdowns this season through 5 games. His career high is 4, and that was last year. I mean, he's averaging almost 5 yards per carry, but he also averages just a couple runs per game. So, don't sleep on what he's doing there, but they don't have, Roman Hemby is not Anthony McFarland. And, I know that's a bad name to bring up here. People remember that game. Ohio State loved that play so much. They let it go multiple times in that game. It's going to be interesting to see how Jim Knowles tries to scheme up what it is that Mike Locksley wants to do. We talked about last year, well, Jim Knowles bakes in 5, 3, however many big plays. Well, Maryland wants to have 12 explosive plays. Well, I want to have the winning Powerball ticket. I think Mike Locksley's closer to his goal than I am to my goal. But it's going to be a challenge. I'm going to be interested to see where they attack. And you bring up Ty Felton and his, $140 or whatever, 3 touchdowns. There was only 3 touchdowns on the season. He just happened to be the hot hand, but they do a really good job of spreading the ball around. They don't have one guy or 2 guys that they focus on. It's much more of an ensemble type of situation than when they had Rakeem Jarrett and guys like that.
Yeah, they've got a handful of guys that like 4 guys with between 18 and 19 catches on the team right now, and a couple guys behind them. Last year against Ohio State, Maryland had 8 plays of 20 yards or more from scrimmage. This year, through 4 games, Ohio State has given up 9 total 20-yard plays. So this is a different Ohio State defense, but this may be the most explosive offense that they've placed in terms of outside and downfield. And I'm with Kevin, like, you're not going to see Talia Tagovailoa. He's not going to run it necessarily. He's not part of the running game, but he is part of keeping the passing game alive, which is what concerns Day and Jim Knowles, and talking about sending a lone blitzer after Talia Tagovailoa and how easily he can just make that guy miss, and be it a linebacker, be it a safety, whatever. He has that ability to sidestep a defender and then create after that, because he's looking to create downfield because he's got good receivers. He doesn't need to take any hits. We all know Tagovailoas have been hit enough as children, and plus they get hit and they break. So he's looking to get rid of the ball, and that's where he's at his best. And I think that's going to be the interesting thing to watch in this, because the secondary hasn't been tested like this in terms of the length of time that they'll need to cover and the different breaking routes, the scramble drills that they're going to have to cover. So this will be an interesting test for them to handle.
Do we take the Notre Dame offensive output against Duke to be valid in any way to make any connection? Okay, Notre Dame struggled to score. They were at 13 points forever until they scored a final touchdown to make it 21 and, of course, win the game.
I think there's something to it.
I'm not a big believer. I mean, I had somebody in my chat on Monday try and raise that question. And as I looked at the yardage comparisons, there was no major disparity really between what Ohio State did against Notre Dame to what Duke did against Notre Dame to what Notre Dame did against Ohio State to what Notre Dame did against Duke. There was nothing that really stood out. Duke ran for more yards against Notre Dame than Ohio State did. That kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. But to me, matchups are so different. It's hard to tell. I mean, you can't. I think if you looked at season trends and what Notre Dame, let's say in 4 weeks does against 4 or 5 Power 5 opponents, and compared those stats to what Ohio State did against them, then maybe you'd have a valid comparison and say Ohio State's deficient in this, and Notre Dame can't do that. But one game comparison, I don't think you can really glean a whole lot from. And last week was crazy. I had a friend, I'm not going to say who it was, but he had an eight game parlay. He had a $50 bonus bet on one of the books and Fanatics, and he put a lot of heavy favorites in this parlay. And on Friday, he hit Louisville and he hit Oregon State over Utah. And those were two kind of toss-up type games. And then he got into Saturday where he thought, well, I'll just play all the chalk. Wins everything up until Iowa losing to Michigan State, needs a 70-yard punt return to pull the game out. These were all money line picks. So just have to win, not the spread, just have to win the game. And here Iowa's going down in flames until they get a 70-yard punt return to turn that game around against Michigan State. And then they kicked the field goal, I think, at the end to add a little window dressing to it. And then Notre Dame is facing 4th and 16 against Duke. And Sam Hartman, who's, maybe not the most dynamic runner in the world, takes off and gets 17 yards and a first down. And then Audric Estime took it in for a touchdown after that. Notre Dame wins the game. So, Notre Dame coming off of Ohio State was in a real dogfight. And, perhaps they were in a bit of a letdown situation after playing Ohio State. I wonder about Ohio State having 2 weeks and everybody patting them on the back, and saying you are the greatest thing since sliced bread. You have arrived. You can do no wrong. Well, Maryland could come into Ohio Stadium for 3 quarters and play Ohio State dead even, and that wouldn't shock me one bit. So we're in for, I think, a real treat, I think, on Saturday.
I think that's where the extra week has helped Ohio State, because they've been able to come down from that and then get – I agree they're probably getting patted on the back, but that happens maybe the weekend, the days after that. Now, like, reality has set back in that they need to get back to work. So I think the emotion of winning that game and then playing the next week is tough, and I think that also contributes to Notre Dame's struggles. But Duke is pretty good defensively. I will say that.
Yep, very impressive.
Yeah, Notre Dame averaged a yard more per play against Duke than Clemson did. I don't know if that's I don't know if comparing anything to Clemson's offense right now is good, but they average like 6 yards of play against Duke, and it's not terrible. But I'm kind of with Steve, like, just based on one game, a 2 week, basically a 2 week sample size after an emotional win. I think there are a lot of extenuating circumstances there, but I'm impressed with Duke, and if Michigan State can get Mike Elko, I think that would be something right up their alley.
Doesn't sound like they're. Go ahead.
Steve. I was going to say there's not a lot of love between Ohio State and Maryland, and who's on that coaching staff there? Josh Gaddis, and Josh Gaddis had plenty of things to say about Ohio State while he was at Michigan. So, it's one thing for coaches to sit there and say, well, we don't like those guys or whatever. I mean, and they can sit there and try and matriculate that down to the players and everything else. But I think that the open week came at a good time because you were able to clear the deck a little bit. Yeah, I'm sure there was, as Steve and Tony both said, a lot of backslapping and guffawing and everything else. And you guys are great and everything else, but you also had the opportunity to cut the players loose for a little bit and now bring them back in hopefully get them refocused and have a better start coming out of an open week than traditional. But I mean, I think that's a problem that most programs face coming out of that. But I think that it would be more troublesome for me if they would have had to come out and play this game straight up coming right out of Notre Dame.
I think it shows good leadership by the coaching staff and kind of a change of culture. I think that they practice Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then the coaches trusted them to take Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off. And a lot of those guys took advantage of that time to go back to their hometowns. And I know Luke Montgomery went to a game at Findlay on Friday night and was there to take pictures and be with people. And Luke Montgomery got in the Notre Dame game for 3 plays as a freshman and did a nice job there. But to me, the maturity of this team has kind of showed that, that they had the weekend off and we didn't hear anything about any of their exploits. So that was that's always a dangerous time when the boys are away from home for a couple of days. And by home, I mean the Woody Hayes Center. And, kind of left to their own devices. Everybody came out on the other end of it. It sounds like this team is 100%, including Marvin Harrison Jr. and his ankle, which somehow remarkably did not end in a terrible injury after what initially came up on the screen. Looked like it buckled a little bit, but seems to me like he's going to be practicing this week and in the fold for Saturday against Maryland.
I think it was those Louis Vuitton cleats. Is that what?
It could have been.
I'm Gumby, damn it! I'm Gumby.
Yep. The danged old plyometric strikes again. So there you go.
We've got Bob's question here, and along those same lines. So we're good on Marvin Harrison playing regardless. There should be no thought given to holding him back. We've got this. It's the strongest position unit on either side of the ball.
It is interesting because they do have a deep room, but it's about what is an 80% Marvin Harrison versus a 100% Carnell Tate. Like, you're going to take Marvin Harrison in that. And he had 2 catches after he got hurt, and one of them was a key one on the final drive. But I thought, well, once he went down, I was like, I think I said it to Kevin. Now it's Carnell Tate's time. They've got to go with him in there because he's that other X. But they can move guys around. We saw Xavier Johnson in there as well, and you move him around. You put Emeka elsewhere. But I'm a little surprised we're not seeing more usage of the receivers. And at this point, it doesn't look like it's going to happen this year for Jaden Ballard, and then it's going to be up to him. Like, does he want to try it at Ohio State another year after this? Just Heartline really likes his 3 top guys, and they've even had to kind of remind themselves to play Xavier Johnson more, I think, because we didn't really see him in week 1 much, and then they're like, okay, we're going to get him out there, we're going to put him in the backfield, we're going to motion him out. Just it's one of those things that also, like, when he comes in, it feels like they're just going to try to get him the ball and use him and then put him back on the bench and go back to what they're normally doing. But I would like to see more depth, more usage of the depth. But in the big games, you're going to go with the guys you trust most, because you don't want to be throwing to a freshman who, doesn't know where things are supposed to be or doesn't have that connection. Because after that Notre Dame game, talking to Kyle McCord and Ryan Day and Emeka Ibuka, that pass on whatever it was, 3rd and 19 or whatever, to the 1, that was something that they do, and they practice that and they walk through that, and they knew when to stop, when to do, all of that, the intricacy there that you can't trust a freshman to pick up on all of that. And so that's why you put the guys out there that you trust. I mean, just look at JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer playing that entire game. In big games, that's just what happens.
Yeah, I was going to say, go ahead, Steve. I cut you off last time. Go ahead.
I just looked at the snap counts that our friend Donald Hope, Dan Hope over at 11 Warriors, we call him Donald Hope internally. It was Marvin Harrison 66, Emeka Ibuka 64, Julian Fleming 57. Those 3 guys went the distance, and then Xavier Johnson 6. Ballard and Tate only got on the field for special teams. So that will tell you we've got more receivers than IBM. We've got more blah, 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 blah. We can throw it all around the field. We can do this and we can do that. And we've recruited 8 5-star receivers every year for the last 10 years, but only 4 of them are going to play. So whatever.
I just was right.
There's a diminishing return to that. There's a diminishing return to that, is my thought.
I agree with Tony there that, I'll give somebody a super chat if they make a GIF out of Steve flailing there. You want to sit there and get the younger guys in, get games over with. We've seen Ohio State play a lot of games that have not necessarily gotten to the point of saying, all right, everybody else goes in. I mean, and certainly not against Notre Dame, a game where, yes, Ohio State kept Notre Dame off the board for 2.5 quarters and then found itself trailing and everything else. I mean, I would love to see Tate and Ennis and Ballard and these guys get some more run. I mean, hell, nobody ever talks about the 2022 receiver class. I mean, there are a lot of guys that it would be great for them to have the opportunity. And we do talk a lot about playing for the future, but you have to play for the present first. And playing for the present, in a lot of ways, necessitates having Harrison Jr., Ibuka, those guys out there, Fleming. So there's kind of a balance there. And yes, you do want to get these guys in some higher leverage situations, but maybe not the highest of leverage situations.
I think we addressed Mika's question about Julian Fleming and Xavier Johnson. Mika, we will address recruiting in all one big batch a little bit later, so we can get to that. Folks, super chats are certainly welcome to help support the channel, keep this show going, so we appreciate those, and we will answer all the super chats. Otherwise, it's just kind of a random selection of comments and questions here. There was a statement made by David concerning, there it is, interior offensive line. We have not had the success running the ball in between the tackles.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's a concern. And I don't think they're getting as much out of Donovan Jackson as they thought they would. And I don't know how much of that is playing next to Carson Hinsman, a new starting center, and playing in Josh Simmons, a new starting left tackle. I think both of those guys playing positions that they didn't play last year. So, that may be part of that. And there's always this feeling of when you have questions about who's on your left and who's on your right, or who's ever in front of you, you're also worried about their job as much as you are your job. And so I think maybe there's some of that going on. You saw that with the defense last year, basically as a whole, because there was just so much newness to it. So now everybody's focused on their own job and doing their 111th, and things are going better because they know they can trust everybody. I think the offensive line is still figuring out, how much they can trust each other, but also you got to play better. And Ryan Day said it on Tuesday. At some point, you've just got to move the guy across from you. You're big, strong. You've got to be big and strong. But they've not done well on the interior run. Ryan Day said they want to be north of 80% on short yardage in terms of 3rd and 4th and 1 and 2. Right now this season, they are 4 of 10 in those 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, 3rd and 2, 4th and 2 situations. So they need to get twice as good as they have been to be just shy of where Ryan Day wants them in those short yardage situations.
Eesh.
Which is totally. They only have to go. They only have to bat like 110% from the rest of the way out to get to 80% for the season.
Yeah.
Are we talking about slugging plus OPS or something, or if it's batting average? We're in trouble there. But
this is when the stat walks lose me. I just want to know his home runs, his RBIs, and his batting average. None of the other crap matters.
What is
about WAR?
What is Jim Knowles' WAR?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It was interesting right out of the gate. Dave Biddle, who works with Steve Hellwagon, brings right up to Ryan Day about, quarterback sneak. And, I've just seen an epidemic in watching football this year on all levels, that it seems that picking up 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1 has been very difficult for a lot of teams. It was even brought up to Jim Knowles to a certain point, and of course he had to bring up his hometown Eagles, so I kind of quit listening at that point because I don't like the Eagles. But you've got to find ways to be able to do this. But 4 of 10 is just shockingly bad, and I mean, just not anything that I'm used to seeing. So I don't know if I have any answers to that one, other than you've got to move the bodies in front of you. You've got to get a better push from your line. You've got to have a better, you got to show that you're the better team. You're the team that's ranked number 4 in the nation. You got to go out there and play like it.
I will say they're 3 of 4 on 3rd and 3. So on running the ball on 3rd and 3. So good job.
I probably should have brought this up a minute ago when we were talking wide receivers, but it seemed to me, it just hit me that they force-fed Cade Stover right out of the gate against Notre Dame. It was like the first drive or two. Like they had scripted plays, Cade Stover, Cade Stover, Cade Stover, and then they kind of went into the flow of the game and got away from that.
I think some of that, I wonder if some of that is trying to free up Marvin Harrison and trying to say, hey, we're gonna take what you give us, but also ease up on Marv. And that's something they've talked about, where if people want to double him and bracket him, then you've got to go away from him and find the open area. But some of those throws that McCord was taking to Stover were not open areas, and he was really trying to thread the needle on some of these, that skinny posts that weren't open and that Stover couldn't get around the defender too. So there's a lot for Kyle McCord to learn from that one. But I do think you're going to continue to see like an emphasis on trying to make teams pay for doubling Marv so that they come off of doubling Marv. But I also think you could do more when he is singled to go get him, because I can tell you, Steve and Kevin and I will sit up there, and every time Marv is singled covered, we're like, hey, just one guy on Marv right now. And then they'll go away from it.
Mark Nave is an interior offensive lineman out of Toledo, top 20 player in the state of Ohio, top 40 interior offensive lineman, depending on your service. He is decommitted from Ohio State. Kevin, take us through the latest on the recruiting front.
Yeah, with Mark Nave, I know that Justin Fry was up in Toledo, and I'm sure that they had to have kind of some conversations about where things were going. And, for whatever reason, people may like to throw words out like processed or whatever, but I think that it was probably more of a case of Mark Nave realizing that, maybe the dream wasn't going to completely come together, and he decided to open up his recruitment. And it sounds like Ohio State has, exited the picture there. I mean, they still have 3 linemen in the class with the Armstrong twins and with Ian Moore out of Indiana. And you certainly wish, Mark Nave, who, was a fixture at Ohio State's camps and, was certainly working on improving his craft. But I think there's more pressure on Ohio State offensive line recruiting than there's ever been, just with the sheer amount of bad scouting that they've done and bodies that they brought in that haven't necessarily been able to get to the mix. I mean, we sat here and had this whole conversation about Ohio State's interior line not necessarily performing well in the run game. If you sit there and you think that something is not going to work, I mean, it's show business, not show friends, and you've got to make those decisions. I mean, Mark is a great kid. I've had an opportunity to talk to him on several occasions, and I wish him nothing but the best. But it just didn't work out.
Yeah, I am interested to see if there's anything more comes out of this, but I kind of agree that it was a case of the two parties kind of realizing that it might not be the best fit, and that's just the way that it works out sometimes. They now have the benefit of 7 weeks of high school film of watching Mark, in his senior year to go through that. I'm sure they didn't make this, I say decision. It didn't come to this point without them examining every ounce or every inch of that tape to know whether or not he's somebody who could potentially help them in 2 years or not. I think it may speak to the fact that, and again, you fall in love with the guys who are playing, And, you hope it works out for Josh Simmons and Fryer at the tackle positions. You lose both your guards after this season if you believe that Donovan Jackson truly is going to go to the NFL after this season. And to me, it's Enoch Vamahi and maybe Tegra Toshbola, who has been repping at guard this season, because by all rights, it should be Simmons and Fryer again at tackle next year. But I don't think you can rule out the possibility that if they get to the end of this season and decide we got to do better than this next year, that they go into the transfer portal and go get a legitimate Power 5, all conference tackle to fill one of those two spots next year, and or an all conference guard to fill one of those two spots next year. I don't think you could rule that out. And by not taking Nave, they've now created an extra scholarship spot that, potentially will go to a portal guy. They don't seem to be in on a national top 100 offensive lineman, top 100 overall prospect guy.
They're in not. Yeah, they're probably
so few of them.
Yeah,
that it's just not feasible that they're. Maybe they've probably got a 20% chance that they'll sign one. In addition to the three guys they're going to get. I like the Armstrong brothers. I think you look at them standing there, you say, "Oh my, those guys look the part. They're devoted to Ohio State. They're Ohio guys. They played a great program at St. Ed's." And so you say, yes, by their third year, one of them should be starting. I don't know which one, but that's my firm belief. And I think Ian Moore is a good enough player that maybe by his second year, he might be in a position where he'd be, starting. So those guys I have no issue with. Even, the Armstrongs aren't necessarily national top 125 players either. So I've talked a lot about things I really don't know a whole lot about right there, but I'm just trying to give you what it seems to be is the case here, and the overarching thought on this offensive line that, Simmons and Fryer are the placeholders right now at tackle, but at the end of the year, Ryan Day, Brian Hartline, and Justin Fryer, I got to get everybody's name right, will sit down in a room, look each other in the eye and say, can we do better at these positions if we go out there and find somebody? And they may very well decide that they can. So maybe that's part and parcel of letting Nave walk.
And I think also they've got a bunch of guards and right tackles over the last few years, and they need more left tackles. And Nave, I know he was also working at center, but he was going to be an interior guy. I think there's some question, is Ian Moore a guard or a tackle? I think Deontay Armstrong is the only sure tackle in this class right now. So do you need 4 interior guys? I don't think so, because that's, you're almost taking 4 interior guys every year, because you're taking a bunch of guys that can play either right tackle, can either play tackle or guard. And when you're taking guys who can play tackle or guard, you're taking guards and right tackles, basically, because left tackle is an entirely different animal in terms of, okay, we know that guy can play left tackle or right tackle. But when you're, Josh Fryer, who is a guard but is playing right tackle, was almost playing left tackle. Like, if he goes to the NFL, he's almost certainly going to be on the interior. And when you look at all of these guys, if they're playing tackle for you but can't play tackle in the NFL, that's not really the standard that you want to have at Ohio State. Sometimes it can work out, like with Jack Mewhort, who is a fantastic tackle and goes and plays on the interior in the NFL for a little while. And, other guys have done similar. But ideally, your tackles at Ohio State also play tackle in the NFL, just like your running backs play running back at Ohio State, and then they do it in the NFL. Like, you should be able to have those kinds of guys. And right now, I don't know where they're going to get them. Simmons is going to be around for a while. Fryer is obviously coming back. But I also don't think that's a situation where Ohio State's going to look at those guys and be like, we're set there. And I do think they need to be more aggressive on the offensive line in the transfer portal, because everybody else is. And if you can find somebody that solidifies your offensive line, like look at Jonah Jackson back in 2019. Like, that dude was descended from heaven, basically, or Rutgers. Sometimes I get too confused. But he really helped gel that offensive line for them, and he made them better. And if they can go find another guy like that who is also a left tackle, because you can move Simmons back to right tackle, you can move Josh Fryer to guard, like you can find your 5 best guys, but you have to go looking. And I don't think they were as aggressive looking last year until they went through spring ball and realized we're in trouble. And so they need to figure out how much trouble they're in, come December and January.
Yeah, I mean, you throw Luke Montgomery into the mix at tackle. I mean, obviously they talked him up a lot of being somebody who will play. I mean, and he's seen a smattering. Don't need to see him at fullback, but we've seen a smattering of him in the Bison package, or inside joke to some of our shows, the Mastodon package, or whatever you may do there. But I absolutely do think that they're going to have to hit the portal for offensive line, just even if it's out of a depth scenario. And you're not going to be able to go out and go get a top guy who's looking to move up and say, well, we're going to roll you in there to the depth. You may or may not play. I mean, you also don't want to make a lot of promises, but when you go out and, like the guy that went to Oregon, Cornelius, he knew he was going to go in there and step right into that role. And I think Ohio State has to be ready and have its ducks in a row the day that the portal opens, which is now only going to be for 45 days, 30 after the season, 15 in the spring. Have its ducks in a row and be ready with that. And I know Ohio State certainly has a portal division of its recruiting department under Mark Pantoni's leadership, and just going to be a matter of being able to sway those guys there. And 3 letters come to mind with that, and that's NIL.
Yeah, not only your ducks in a row, but about $750,000 for a 1-year tackle.
Is that the going rate right now?
I mean, if it's a premium, if it's just a 1-year guy, right? Like, if it's a 3-year guy, maybe you can do it for 1.5 over 3 years, but you're going to get 1 year out of them. That takes the bidding up. Teams are more desperate for that 1 year quick fix. And, I wouldn't put it past $750K. Or I would.
I wish I had eligibility and knees and talent. I mean, because I could use 1.5 over 3 years. That would be nice.
Yeah, that would do okay. Tony, I guess I'm asking you to launch another exhaustive database, because during this discussion, I'm thinking, wonder if anyone's put anything together to determine what positions need the most development, meaning which positions where the highest recruits have correlated to the best players versus the other ones where there's a bit of a gap. Obviously, you still want the most talented guys, but offensive line comes to mind as more development position. Offensive line coach maybe being a little bit more important and impactful than some of the other positions. Just, I've got nothing to go on except for conversation and observation to say that.
I think the top guys kind of can play pretty early. We've seen Georgia and Alabama start guys. Paris Johnson played as a freshman but started as a sophomore. But I think the offensive line is the number one long-term development position. Justin Fry talked about how for offensive linemen, he told his team, basically your first year, you're learning how to play college football. Your second year, you're learning how to play your position. Then your third year is the year you're playing your position. And, that's your redshirt sophomore year, basically. And then you as a fourth year, like that's how I've always envisioned it. Like if you're not in the too deep by your third year, there are some concerns there. And if you're not starting by your fourth year as a redshirt junior, it's probably not going to happen for you. But then also there is something to be said for these fifth-year seniors that just wait around and then can fill in when needed. But you can't necessarily just wait around for a fifth-year guy to be a starter for you, especially when that has kind of brought the entire talent of the room down because that guy's not playing. So I think offensive line, and a long-winded answer, is the number one position that takes the longest, and you have to be more patient with that offensive line than any other. I know Day will maybe tell you tight end as well, because you have to be able to play tackle and wide receiver. And You line up in different spots. You have to be really smart. So that's another one that I know that they are very developmental on, especially when so many of those guys like Joe Royer never played tight end and G. Scott never played tight end. Like they came in as pass catchers. Cade Stover obviously was a linebacker, running back, that sort of stuff. And so there's a lot of development that goes into that position for sure too.
Getting back to the Maryland matchup, another thought I have that isn't necessarily backed up by anything that I can prove, but Maryland is number 2 in the nation in turnover margin. Their defense has forced 12 in the last 4 games. The Buckeyes don't turn it over. It's typically my thought in these situations is that heavy turnover benefited teams prey on the weak, prey on the irresponsible with the football, as opposed to being able to continue that trend against teams that can protect the football. And so that might be a good omen for the Buckeyes on Saturday.
Yeah, McCord, I think has only thrown the 1 interception, and that was it looks like Brown threw one as well in his limited amount of time. So they're not going to turn it over. They haven't been turning it over. So they don't create any turnovers either, though. So that they continue to not create turnovers. So that would be something nice. You bring in an SEC defensive back like Igbenogson, and you hope, that you get a few turnovers here or there, but haven't materialized yet. Maybe this will be the week, although, Tylea, at times has been prone to that, but we'll see if the Buckeyes can force 1 or 2 this week. But not turning it over, particularly in this era of going from 12 possessions a game down to 8 or 9, is just so critical right now, I think.
Well, you also look at the situation. How many 50-50 balls are being thrown against Ohio State? You look at the Notre Dame game. There were a couple of near interceptions going both ways, honestly. But we saw JT Tuimoloau almost have one of his Penn State-esque type of interceptions. There was another one who was a Tyleek that had it hit him in the hands, or so. We do. I mean, sudden changes like that, short fields are all well and good, but if Ohio State can get its opponent off the field on 3rd down on 3 and outs or short drives, and maybe take 8 possessions up to 10 possessions, that's going to do a lot more for me there than anything else. And you look at who Maryland's played, and they have 8 interceptions, but Noah Kim has thrown 6 already. I mean, I'm sure he threw a couple against Maryland there. They played Indiana, so I assume they played against Taven Jackson, who has not exactly been lighting the world on fire. UVA needs to be sent down to AA at this point. Towson is Towson. I mean, we talk about, just to Steve's opening comments about it being criminal that Maryland is not ranked, which I do agree with him there. I think that they should be in that 23, 24, 25 slot rather than 26. They have played less than nobody.
Yeah, I will say, Mark, to your point about Ohio State not turning the ball over this season, that's Notre Dame's fault for not catching those passes. That's number one. If they catch some passes from Kyle McCord, they're creating some turnovers. But Taulia Tagovailoa, the last 2 years against Ohio State, is completing 72% of his passes. Threw 2 interceptions in 2021 against them, none last year. So I think there will be opportunities. He creates some opportunities for interceptions, just as Kyle McCord has, but you have to take advantage of them. And I do think, what does Maryland need to win that turnover margin by to make this a game in the fourth quarter? Does it need to be 2? Does it need to be 3? Or it doesn't need to be as many anymore? Because as Steve said, possessions are fewer now. So you're already basically Ohio State is -2 just because of the loss of possessions. They go into every game now -2 almost. And so they have to, just be more efficient, as Ryan Day has said. Like every play, every 3rd down is bigger now because of the lack of possessions.
Was there really that many passes that Notre Dame could have caught? Of course, the one that everyone thinks of is the tipped ball down the middle on the final drive that I don't know that was dropped. That would have been a very difficult catch for a linebacker to make safety. I don't remember.
The safety. That one, that was a tough catch, but it was through his hands. There was the
There's one going in the other direction that I remember.
There was one to Marvin in the end zone that Benjamin Morrison had it right on his hip, and it was a low throw. So I've seen some people say there are 5 throws. There are like 5 throws that Notre Dame got their hands on, but I think they could have came away with the 2 interceptions in that game, and it would not have been a shock.
And you're saying that would have changed that route that Ohio State had into a Notre Dame win?
Well, an interception on the last drive might have changed some things there, Mark, in my opinion.
Possible. It is possible. Well, we appreciate everybody being here. Buckeyes Live here at the Voice of College Football. It's typically Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time with these guys. And since he didn't receive an introduction off the top, we got Tony Gerdeman here, Buckeye Weekly. That's the podcast that comes your way every day, right, Tony?
That's pretty much during the season. Yeah, we just dropped one last night talking about what we learned from Ryan Day and Jim Knowles yesterday. And Jim Knowles as this new, softer, less aggressive defensive coordinator, which I also just wrote about at Buckeye Huddle this morning.
Better?
Well, you know what? This is a guy
Proof's in the pudding so far.
It was interesting watching him talk about how it is kind of painful for him not to be more aggressive, but it is also nice keeping the points off of the board.
It's killing him to do better. Their longest touchdown they've given up is 2 yards, apparently, somebody said. Mm-hmm. So that's very telling.
They've given up 2 2-yarders and I think 2 1-yarders this season.
Wow.
So if they've only given up 3 big plays going into the fourth quarter, is Jim Knowles kind of egging on the defense that there's got to be 2 or 3 more baked in there somewhere that they got
only if you're baking with eggs.
Kevin,
it's 11:55. What do you want from me?
Kevin, what's going on with you?
As I said in the beginning of the show, I just posted a story looking at some numbers of the quarterbacks that are on Ohio State's schedule, trying to see where Talia fits in the mix with the quarterbacks that Ohio State's facing. Is he the most complete quarterback? Where does that rank? I have tail of the tape that is done. I just have to decide when to run it. I don't know if I want to run two big stories like that within an hour of one another. So maybe later today, maybe earlier on Thursday. And then I will be doing a Big Me live show on Friday at 1 p.m.
Steve, you're all over the place.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm taping something with Spectrum that'll air probably tomorrow. And then I'm also part of the Big Ohio Football Show on Channel 4 here in Columbus and various Next Star stations around the great state of Ohio. So that's kind of cool. And going to drop game data, my big preview of the game probably later today. We've got interviews with 11 players tonight. So that'll be kind of neat to get some insights from some of the guys after today's practice. And Coach Day will have what they call a lightning round tomorrow at around noon to answer a few questions after his radio show's over, basically, just to answer last-minute questions before the game on Saturday. I'll post some picks for the weekend. There are some big games this weekend. Georgia, I think they're hosting Kentucky, and you just wonder if, Georgia's been a little bit lackluster. Should they still be number one, with how, I would say poorly that they've played, but they just haven't played great football. It doesn't feel like just yet. But then there's also that sentiment that when they've won 20 or 21 games in a row that, to be the man, you got to beat the man. And no one has succeeded in doing that all the way back to the SEC championship game at the end of the 21 season. So, that's been a big debate. I do the Super 16 poll every Sunday, and I think there was some
you and Lou Holtz.
Yeah, me and the great Lou Holtz, who dropped Ohio State 5 spots despite not playing this past week. Is it Texas? Is it Michigan? Michigan finally played a real dominating 4-quarter game at Nebraska. Man, that was a long time coming for them. Does that warrant them being put up to number one? I kind of look at this Big Ten, a caste system. You've got 5 teams at the top with the big 3 plus Wisconsin and Maryland. And if Maryland can give Ohio State a game, then there's no reason to think that they should be number 4, or Wisconsin's going to play Iowa here in another week or so, and that'll be determining who probably comes out of the West probably. But those are the top 5. Then you've got 5 really, 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 really awful teams at the bottom with Northwestern and Michigan State, Indiana. There's 3 of them.
Illinois has not played a decent football game the entire season.
God awful. Nebraska, if I didn't mention them. So there's 5 right there. Then you got the 4 in the middle that are just kind of, there. Rutgers, Minnesota. Even though they lost to Northwestern, I think they're still, a middle of the road team. Maybe that'll be disproven going forward. I don't know. But yeah, you got those teams in the middle that are just Purdue, just kind of lurking there. Ohio State's got to go to Purdue next week. And, I was shocked that they were able to beat Illinois last week. So the game next week is going to be Purdue's 3rd straight game on Peacock. So if you're an Ohio State fan, don't feel crapped on by being the 9th Big Ten team to finally have a game selected for Peacock. Everybody else seemingly has had one except you up till this point, and now you're getting your dose of Peacock next week. But those poor people at Purdue, this will be their 3rd one in a row, I guess, next week when they host Ohio State, which I've said before, a game I'm not going to be at because I'm going to my niece's wedding. So looking forward to missing that game next week.
Georgia's number 8 here, Steve, by the way.
On your poll, number 8?
It's not a poll, it's a ranking. It's a dictatorship. And
I kept them number 1 just by osmosis, but I seriously did think about Texas dominating Kansas the way that they did. I know it's just Kansas. Michigan dominating the way they finally did again. I know it's just Nebraska, but those 2 games are better than anything Georgia's really done. I mean, we were all joking when they finally score a touchdown with 3 minutes to go. Heart of a champion, to beat a crappy, awful Auburn team on the road in the final 3 minutes. And Auburn, by basis of that loss, should have been installed at 25. I mean, even though they were unranked, by basis of a tight loss to number 1 ranked SEC team, that automatically puts you in at 25. And as we touched on earlier, LSU getting that 25 love, in there at 25 despite losses, a 70-65 loss to Ole Miss or whatever that was. So teams that can't defend but are still up there in the polls, Ole Miss and USC. So there you go.
Steve, you mentioned a caste system. Do you guys show up at the stadium on Saturday thinking big game, huge game? Obviously, that's Notre Dame, Penn State, Michigan, and then everybody else is nothing. And Wisconsin kind of leans going into the season big game because it's on the road, and just traditionally Wisconsin's a good program.
Yeah.
This one's kind of on the fence, right?
A better game than we thought it was going to be when the schedule came out. Let's just put it that way. Or a more attractive game, a more interesting game, certainly, because Maryland, to my way of thinking, I mean, what's the most points Ohio State's given up so far this year?
10,
I don't know,
14.
10, 14. They could score 21 points, but that's not going to be enough, I don't think, to keep them in this game, I don't believe. I think Ohio State's – I'm kind of leaning like 38-21, something in that realm right now, thinking about it.
All right, guys. Appreciate you all being here. Typically on Wednesday, but keep those notifications on once you've subscribed to know when we go live. Ohio State, Maryland, Fox, noon Eastern time. For Steve, for Kevin, for Tony. We'll see you next week.
That's it.